Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Charlotte Schaefer. I'm with the Community Foundation of Greater Muscatine, and I'm also a member of the Muscatine County Housing Council. We have a large number of great things happening across our county. You saw in the video, you can see in your booklets, a lot of the collective investment that's currently occurring. We had a recent distinguishment of being named as one of the inaugural thriving communities by the Iowa Finance Authority, and we'll hear more about that. And State Senator Mark Loughran, who is from Muscatine, recently received the IFA Legislative Friend of Housing Award. But we still have a staggering unmet or underdeveloped housing needs. You saw some of the community stats. 46% of the total workforce drives into our county every day. In August, there were 75 homes for sale across 17,000 households. These are my children, 2 of my 3 boys. In this picture, Brad's 3 and Mark's about 18 months. And when about this age, we told them that we were going to have a new baby. So the next morning, Brad, the older one, kind of paddles into the kitchen in his feety pajamas, blanket all stuffed, all businesslike under his arm, and he inquires, "When's Mark leave?" Because clearly if somebody's coming, somebody's going, it's not going to be him. And honestly, I lived with Mark. That would have been my choice too. But the fact is, that's exactly what happens in our community right now. We need someone to go for someone to come. So in 2020, the Muscatine County Housing Council was formed to bring countywide agencies together to try to address housing solutions. We in turn developed a comprehensive housing plan that was later adopted by both the City of Muscatine and Muscatine County. And one facet of our work has been to annually host this housing summit so that we can broaden conversations. Now I'd like to pause and acknowledge a few people who are in attendance today. Penny Basek with Senator Grassley's office, if you can just raise your hand. Michelle Beck with Senator Ernst's office. And John Kaufman with Representative Miller Mead's office. Thank you all for being here. A few notes for today's events. You have an agenda as well as the extended bios for each of the speakers at your tables. Please feel free to come and go as you need to today. There's drinks outside. There will be drinks out throughout the session. If you need to grab some, please do so. We'll take a 10-minute intermission about halfway through as well. We'll also have question and answer at the conclusion of all the presentations, so you'll be able to address all the speakers at that time. Now, a bit about our speakers, and in reverse order, so this will be in reverse of how they speak. First, we have Clint Christopher. Clint moved his family to Muscatine and assumed the role of superintendent of Muscatine Community School District at the most opportune time, 2020. Now, timing may not be Clint's strong suit, but leadership has been. He has successfully led the Muscatine School District staff and students forward in some of its most difficult times. Clint has earned the respect for his decisions and navigation throughout. Next, we have Jody Royal Goodwin. Jody is the City of Muscatine Community Development Director and Muscatine Housing Authority Director. I'm going to try that one more time, Jody. Muscatine County Housing Authority Director. She's been a fierce friend of housing during her tenure, getting results across the housing continuum. Often overlooked in recognition, Jody is also a United States Army veteran, serving both stateside and in the Middle East. Director Debbie Durham leads the Iowa Economic Development Authority, as well as the Iowa Finance Authority. And she has an expert pulse on the state's economic activity. Debbie and her team have been consistent and committed friends to our community throughout by sharing both their expertise as well as funding. Debbie's brought with her today Derek Fulton, Amber Rogers, and Deanna Triplett, and they're sitting throughout. Ben Winchester. Ben is a rural sociologist and researcher with the University of Minnesota Extension. Ben has spoken to groups in Muscatine remotely before and will be joining us virtually again today. Although he claims he's at a conference, we in fact believe Ben is afraid if he visits Muscatine County, he will have to uproot his family and move them here. And last, Andrew Dumont. Andrew is the lead community development analyst at the Federal Reserve Board and has graciously traveled from Washington, D.C. to be here with us today. He's going to share his expertise and research. He's an accomplished and passionate speaker on rural development. Andrew is also the co-author of Rural Prosperity, which was published by the St. Louis Fed and the Board of Governors, and has generously provided copies to each of you today. Thank you, Andrew. And with that, Andrew, we welcome you to the stage, and we welcome you to Muscatine.
Good morning, everyone. As Charlotte mentioned, my name is Andrew Duma, and I am a community development analyst at the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C. Please don't hold that against me. It is a very nice place to live if you ever visit. And I have a confession to make. I turned 40 last month, and this is the first time I've ever set foot in Iowa. So please don't hold that against me either. But just appreciate the invite from Charlotte to come out and give me the opportunity to come and visit this beautiful state and talk to you all about this very important topic. And despite giving a lot of these conversations, apparently I still don't know how to work any of this stuff, so bear with me. All right. So during my remarks, I'm going to touch on a few things that I hope will be relevant to you all in your efforts to make Muscatine a great place to live, work, and raise a family. I'm going to start by exploring a relatively recent mindset shift that's taking place in the economic development industry about the proper roles and areas of focus for economic developers. I'll delve into some of the reasons why I believe this shift is taking place and provide an overview of a couple of community development frameworks that I think can help guide the efforts of folks like you all in advancing your goals as a community when it comes to addressing issues around housing availability and affordability, but really any area of community development, but specific to what we're here to talk about today, certainly applicable to housing issues. And lastly, I'll highlight a few examples of strategies that other states and local communities are implementing to tackle their own housing challenges. But first, because I am here from Washington, D.C., I need to read my disclaimer. The information, analyses, and conclusions set forth are those of the presenter, being me, do not necessarily indicate concurrence by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, the Federal Reserve banks, or members of their staffs. So these are my views. You can't call Jay Powell and blame him for anything like that. All right, so as I mentioned, I'll start by outlining my views on the future of economic development. So the future of economic development for me involves two major activities. The first is making your community or region attractive to people, and then creating the conditions for those people to be productive and innovative. So as you can see from this slide, I believe the lines between economic development and community development, while never completely solid, are becoming increasingly blurry. Now, the second group of activities are likely to involve familiar ground for economic developers. Things like entrepreneurship support, business attraction and retention, and workforce development and skills training. The first group is likely somewhat less familiar ground for economic developers and more commonly associated with community development. So things like affordable housing, childcare access, creative placemaking, and high-quality public education. I believe that both are and will continue to be critical to achieving economic prosperity today and for the foreseeable future. In addition to expanding beyond traditional economic development activities, economic developers are increasingly focused on ensuring that their efforts are inclusive and benefit all segments of the community. As we'll see in the next section, this shift to focusing on more community development-like activities and being more intentionally inclusive is being driven by both new and expanded research on what matters to success, as well as by on-the-ground realities. So, what are some of the factors driving this mindset shift? One major factor is workforce availability, or rather a lack of workforce availability. Now, probably not come as a surprise to many of you, but we're in a very tight labor market right now, and were, frankly, even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this chart shows the number of unemployed persons per job opening, and that's the blue line, and the number of job openings per 10,000 people 16 and over, which is the orange line. The lighter dashed lines are those measures for Iowa. As you can see, the number of unemployed persons per job opening is at historic lows. And the number of job openings per 1,000 people 16 and over, while down from its peak at the end of 2021, is at a very high level relative to the last 20 years. As a result, there is a huge competition for workers right now. Limited workforce availability may be one of the most significant constraints to growth right now and for the foreseeable future, especially as baby boomers retire in increasing numbers and international migration was significantly depressed during the pandemic compared to levels in the 1990s and early 2000s. Now, while ongoing efforts to tame inflation by my bosses, among others, may rebalance this to some degree, these underlying demographic forces are likely to continue affecting workforce availability for the foreseeable future. In rural areas, this workforce shortage is exacerbated by a long-term decline in population growth. For the first time, rural America experienced an overall decline in population over the last decade. Now, for rural Iowa, this declining population began in the first decade of the century, and has continued since. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new here, so just quickly note that Muscatine has had more stability than rural Iowa overall from a population standpoint, but still has had essentially the same population for the last 16 years or so. Therefore, rural areas generally, and Muscatine specifically, must focus on attracting and retaining as many people as possible if they want to even maintain, certainly grow their communities and economies. So, what can individual rural communities or broader regions do to achieve that outcome? Now, I'm sure all of you love to read academic research papers, so you probably have read these already. But I will summarize for you, if that's not you, some research on how to do that, including some recent research by Weinstein and her co-authors that found that quality of life factors were more important than the quality of the business environment in determining the success of rural and small town communities in attracting and retaining residents, creating jobs, and reducing poverty. Now, they found that the factors most highly associated with higher levels of quality of life were things like lower crime rates, higher public school spending, better broadband access, and a greater presence of recreational facilities, arts and culture organizations, and shopping facilities. Consistent with their findings, Murray and Rupasinghe recently found that better schools are associated with higher levels of in-migration to rural counties. Furthermore, research by Cromartie and his co-authors found that the primary motivating factor affecting the return migration decisions of former rural residents included things like the pace and nature of small town life, the quality of public schools, the availability of recreational amenities, and the feeling that one could make more of a difference in a small town than in a big city. And lastly, research by Deller and his co-authors found that high levels of income inequality are associated with lower population growth in rural areas, a finding that I'll come back to in a few slides. Now to summarize, good public schools, recreational facilities, access to shopping, a slower pace of life, and the ability to make a difference attract residents to rural areas. Now, another major quality of life factor that's critical to attracting and retaining residents is the focus of the summit here today, which is the quality and availability of housing. While not perfect measures, a couple of proxies for the quality of housing are its age and its value. Now, in terms of age, rural Iowa overall, and Muscatine County specifically, has an older housing stock than rural America as a whole, with a much greater share of housing having been built before 1940, and a much smaller share having been built after 1990. In terms of value, median home values for Muscatine County are pretty consistent with median values for rural America as a whole, and slightly higher than those for rural Iowa overall. Now, with respect to availability, Muscatine County has seen growth in its housing stock outpace population growth for the past 2 decades, according to the census. And the blue bars on the left of this chart show population growth in Muscatine County, while the dotted orange bars on the right show growth in the housing stock. Now, as you can see, growth in the housing stock far outpaced population growth during the decade spanning from 2000 to 2010. And yet, Muscatine County has a lower vacancy rate than both rural Iowa and rural America. Still, while relatively low, there does seem to be capacity within the existing housing stock to absorb at least some potential housing demand. The question, going back to the earlier slide, is whether that housing stock is up to the standards of today's home buyer. The last background aspect of housing I'd like to discuss here is housing affordability, which in many ways is where the quality and availability factors I mentioned earlier come together. Now, this table shows the percent of households that are burdened by their housing costs, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income on housing. Now, it breaks that down for homeowners and renters, for rural America as a whole, for rural Iowa overall, and for Muscatine County. As you can see, a significant share of households making under $50,000 a year are burdened by their housing costs. Now, in Muscatine County, about 6,600 households are estimated to be making under $50,000 a year, including about 4,000 homeowners and 2,600 renters. This represents nearly 4 out of 10 households in the county. Now, between 40 and 50% of these households are estimated to be burdened by their housing costs. And I just want to make a technical note here, which is that while it appears that Muscatine County has a higher rate of housing cost burden than rural America or rural Iowa overall, none of these differences are what we would call statistically significant due to sampling error in census data. So it could be exactly the same is the point. It's just sort of an issue of statistical sampling. Either way, it's still high. As I mentioned earlier, another factor driving this new approach to economic development is an increased focus on inclusive development. And this increase in focus on inclusive development is being driven by a mounting body of research which indicates that higher levels of income inequality lead to slower and less resilient economic growth. For example, recent research by some of my colleagues at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco estimated the U.S. economy missed out on $2.6 trillion in GDP in 2019 because of racial and gender disparities in the labor force. Now, fortunately, there are factors that mitigate the negative effects of income inequality on economic growth. For example, higher intergenerational mobility, and stronger institutions. And this is likely because if you are less bound by the circumstances of your birth, essentially what intergenerational mobility measures, then higher levels of income inequality are less detrimental to the overall economy because people are able to rise above their childhood circumstances. Now, relatively recent work by Raj Chetty and his co-authors have explored the types of factors associated with higher intergenerational mobility. Now, I won't spend a lot of time going to those here. Happy to talk about those later if it's of interest. But the bottom line is many can be influenced by public and private actions. So there are actions we can take to reverse this unfortunate reality and unlock the potential of currently marginalized communities. Now, this need to unlock the potential of historically marginalized communities is particularly salient in rural areas because nearly all rural population growth in recent decades has been driven by people of color. Specifically, the growth of the rural Hispanic population, as shown in these pie charts from a recent article by Dan Lichter and Ken Johnson, who's actually in the book that you all have. And on the left pie chart is the total non-metro population by race or ethnicity, which is primarily non-Hispanic white. But on the right pie chart is growth by race and ethnicity, whereas almost 60% of population change over the last 30 years has been by Hispanic or Latino individuals. Now, since people of color represent the primary population group sustaining rural workforces, back to the earlier workforce shortage challenge, the only way to power rural economies going forward is to figure out how to ensure that people in communities of color are connected to the economy and have the tools and skills they need to be a productive part of the rural economy now and in the future. If we don't, there's little chance that rural economies will thrive going forward. Now, given the importance of creating a vibrant community that's attractive to potential workers and the massive potential gains of economic inclusion, both nationally and to individual communities, it behooves us all to figure out how to foster lively communities that unlock more of the potential of previously marginalized populations. Luckily, and I think part of the reason why I'm here, is that the Federal Reserve, myself and my colleagues, have recently developed a couple of frameworks that I believe can help provide some insights into how to take effective local action to advance inclusive economic and community development, which I'll briefly cover now. The first framework I'll discuss was developed by me and a co-author, Daniel Paul Davis, in the book that you have on your table, which was published by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis in late 2021. But before I dive into that framework, I just want to note a few things about this book. So this is Investing in Rural Prosperity. It is a free book, so I wish I could say that you were really super special in getting a free copy of it, but everybody can get a free copy. We just happen to ship them out here for you. It is available electronically and in hard copy, so if you prefer to read on your tablet or your phone or some other way, you can just download it and read it that way. The book is broken down into 4 sections. First covers important context on past, present, and future, potential future, I should say, of economic opportunity in rural communities. Second outlines a new framework for fostering shared economic prosperity in rural communities, which I will touch briefly on in a moment. The third highlights case studies from across the country of communities advancing shared economic prosperity in a variety of ways. And the fourth includes various recommendations for action at the local, state, and federal levels for rural development stakeholders in a variety of roles. So whether you're a policymaker, economic development authority, foundation, however you're approaching this work, there's some ideas Now, if you do prefer an electronic version or you want to request more free copies of the book, which you are totally allowed to do, you can visit the St. Louis Fed's website, which is www.stlouisfed.org/investinrural. You can also just type into your favorite search engine, investing in rural prosperity, and it should be the first thing you comes up. I don't know what your algorithm is, but maybe it doesn't. For me, it works. But then, I edited it, so not surprising. All right. So moving on to the framework itself. So we call this framework the TRIC, or TRIC, to shared rural prosperity. And not just because it makes a great acronym, which it does. And I'm from Washington, so you need an acronym. But we propose this framework because we believe that while every community has assets to build on, simply having assets is not sufficient for creating shared economic prosperity. So we crafted a framework for how rural communities can convert the presence of assets into economic prosperity that's felt by the whole community. And to do that, we believe that work must be tailored, resilient, inclusive, and collaborative. Now again, in the interest of time, I won't delve into what we mean by each of these principles. I don't want to eat into my co-speaker's time. But if you want to learn more, you can download our chapter, listen to the podcast, read our blog or our one-pager, or open up this book and read the chapter. All of the other materials are available on the book's website. We wanted to lower the barrier to entry here, so however you like to consume information, it should be available in that way for you. Now it's worth noting that the TRIC framework for how to approach rural development is intentionally not sector or policy area specific. This is not a framework for government, it's not a framework for housers. Again, no matter how you're approaching rural development, what you're trying to do, taking this approach can allow you to be more effective in what you're trying to do. And while we focus specifically on rural communities in our chapter and totally embrace that and unashamed of that, we believe that this approach has applicability in urban and suburban contexts as well. So if you're working across the spectrum, we believe that this is relevant for you. Now, I do just want to apologize for the extremely rudimentary graphic here. You will notice it's a little less pretty than the first one. I'm afraid seems like I'm embarrassed about this, so I'm not afraid. I am happy to say that this is the first time I've presented on this, so you all are getting a sneak peek on this second framework. But it also means the design team hasn't been at this yet, and I threw this together in Word the other day. So you're welcome. So while knowing about this first framework as a step in the right direction, it really only has power when it's used to shape what development activities you choose to carry forward locally and how you go about doing those things. Put another way, it can only make a difference if you implement it within your daily community and economic development work. And doing community economic development work intentionally and inclusively takes strong local capacity. Therefore, the second framework I want to highlight is one that takes that nebulous word of capacity and breaks it down into more relatable concepts. At least that's the idea. So you can come up to me later. Please don't shout it out, especially if you don't think so. And let me know whether you do think this helps or not. And how it might be improved, because it's still a work in progress. So as this slide states, community economic development capacity includes many different capabilities that fall into 5 broad categories, which I'll go over the next 2 slides. Now those categories include human capital, financial capital, social capital, cultural capital, and political capital. I just want to quickly note that some of these categories have overlap. So there aren't strict barriers between them, and I just used them to provide a general framework for how to think about the types of important capabilities that are in each group. I also just want to note that as the diagram on the previous slide shows, each of the capabilities in each category can be built at the individual, organizational, or community level. So you can sort of see the rings on the inside. So I'll try to point out a few examples of what that looks like as I go through my discussion. The last thing I will point out before I get started is that the first two categories on this slide are what many, in my experience, think of when they think of capacity, and which many efforts to provide quote-unquote capacity building or technical assistance aim to bolster. However, in my opinion, the capabilities on the next slide are just as important. So I just want to plant that seed before we get there. So first, human capital. Human capital includes the critical skills and abilities of the people in the community that they contribute to community and economic development activities. These include things like leadership, expertise, time and energy, but also critically important is hope and vision. These capabilities can exist and be built in organizations, like when you invest in the training of a nonprofit executive director. Or they can exist in individuals who are not affiliated with an organization, like when a retired person dedicates their time and energy to supporting local organizations, say Habitat for Humanity or any of the many other worthwhile organizations that exist locally. Next is financial capital, and that is the set of resources available to fund community and economic development activities, include things like operating funding, capital funding, or net assets. It's important to note that in order for there to be sufficient capacity locally, there needs to be sufficient access to all kinds of resources. And in addition to being adequate, those funds really need to be predictable and flexible. And the reason is you can't really invest in the personnel you need if you don't know what your funding is going to look like from year to year. You can't effectively meet the ever-changing needs of the community if all the funding has stringent use requirements attached to them and may not adjust as quickly as the community's needs change. Next is social capital. And this category includes the social networks, relationships, and norms that exist in the community, whether formal or informal. As with the other categories, social capital exists at the individual, organizational, and community levels. So for example, individual people have their own personal networks, but organizations are connected to people and other organizations both within and outside of the community. Each of these connections add to the community's capacity to get things done. Importantly, social capital includes the level of trust in the community. And trust constantly comes up as one of the most important elements of a community's capacity. Communities with high levels of trust can get things done because people believe in one another. And they believe that the person sitting across the table from them will follow through on what they say, and that everyone is coming to that table with the best of intentions. Communities that have that allow amazing things to happen. And where those conditions don't exist, it's very hard to get anything done. Next is cultural capital, and this describes the community's cultural norms and ways of doing things. It dictates what's considered possible and acceptable and how folks go about getting things done. Includes things like the community's innovativeness and its creativity. It also includes things like the community's adaptability, its openness to change, and new ways of doing. Its willingness to consider that the possibility of the future looks different than the past. Importantly, it also includes the community's inclusiveness, its willingness to not only invite everyone to the decision-making table, but to give everyone a real voice in decisions about what needs to get done and how to go about achieving those goals. And lastly, political capital. And this represents the political, legal, and regulatory environment in which local community and economic development activities take place. as well as the community's capacity to shape that political environment. It includes things like the laws and regulations governing community and economic development activities, the existence of affordable housing tax credits, or other policies that may help or hinder development. It also includes things like how the local and state governments work together. When they work together well, local communities have a greater ability to get things done. When they're constantly fighting or even just have misaligned goals or incentives, they're not able to accomplish as much and thus have lower levels of capacity. Now, to really make a difference in addressing the community's needs, it helps to take a tailored, resilient, inclusive, and collaborative approach to community economic development, using a strong foundation of local capacity. I believe that by applying these frameworks or others like them, your efforts to address local affordability and availability issues can be even more successful. I hope they prove useful to you as you move forward. Now that I've provided a brief overview of these two frameworks, I just want to take a few minutes to briefly highlight a couple examples of efforts taking place in other parts of the country to try to tackle issues related to availability and affordability of housing. Now, the two examples on this page include strong involvement by a local foundation. The first is from Martinsville, Virginia, where the Harvest Foundation is partnering with the city, county, and a manufactured home builder to build cottage homes and townhomes. This project is part of an effort to redevelop a previously underutilized section of Martinsville into a vibrant residential neighborhood. And the city provided the land and helped with permitting, and the Virginia Housing and Development Authority provided a grant to cover site prep expenses. For me, the real interesting part of this example is what the local foundation did. And specifically, they provided a financial backstop whereby they would purchase any homes that did not sell within a relatively short time period in order to de-risk the project for the developer and make it more attractive. The second example is from North Carolina, where the Golden Leaf Foundation operates a grant program aimed at helping identify and prep sites for potential economic development. Now, while this program focuses on economic development sites rather than housing, the model can easily be applied in the residential housing arena as well. The last two examples I want to showcase relate to state and local government programs. The first is a bill recently passed in West Virginia that aims to incentivize housing development in certain parts of the state and bring down the cost of such development. It attempts to do this by exempting certain development costs from state and local sales and use taxes, including purchase of building materials, tangible personal property, and services from contractors and subcontractors. It also created a 10-year tax credit that can be used to reduce state, personal, or corporate income taxes to further incentivize new construction and the rehabilitation of existing housing in, again, specific areas of the state. So it's not universal. Both of these new provisions, again, apply to both new construction and rehab. The second example is from Salisbury, Maryland, where the local government is waiving annexation fees, water and sewer connection fees, and building permit fees to incentivize new housing development. It's also providing a 100% property tax credit for up to 5 years to certain nonprofit developers to rehab blighted properties and then sell them at affordable prices to low-income families. Now, these are just a few examples of promising efforts that people are implementing across the country to tackle what is really a pervasive and important challenge of a lack of sufficient, high-quality, and affordable housing. I hope this has seeded some new ideas and helped reinforce the important work you all are doing to try to address this need in Muscatine. I look forward to taking any questions you may have at the end of the session. Now, I think I'm supposed to introduce Ben. Let me just get my notes here. So, happy to introduce our next speaker, Ben Winchester, who, as Charlotte mentioned earlier, is a rural sociologist for the University of Minnesota Extension, and Ben will be joining us virtually. Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to spending the day with you.
Ready for me?
Yep.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Sorry, I can't really see everybody. Hello, my name is Ben Winchester. I'm a rural sociologist with the University of Minnesota Extension. Really great to hear Andrew here. You guys are really lucky to have him down there for the day, so I'm jealous. I'm up here in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Many of you I may have seen over the years here. I've been working with Charlotte over the years with the foundation and just looking at some of the dynamics around, generally the rural region that you all live in. So my own background, I'm a rural sociologist. I kind of ended up in this area of housing because I'm a data geek. I love data, and I kind of have this story of where we have, in many ways been in our rural communities based upon this narrative. And I talk a lot about the rural narrative, and that the narrative you would think that nobody wants to live in our community is a rural dying. When in fact we know that our rural communities are in high demand. And so I hope you can see me okay. You can see my face in the corner. So I'd like to talk a little bit about housing, mainly because it's more than just a data point here. It's really a personal decision that we're all struggling with. We're watching our families go through these decisions. We're having to make decisions for our parents are having to make very difficult decisions. We've got a lot of kind of change that happens across our rural community. And I did talk about this, that our rural narrative on one side is that, our best days are behind us, nobody wants to live here, and that we're all dying. When on the other hand, why can't I find a home to buy? Our housing stocks are completely filled. It's very difficult to find a home to buy. So we typically have these measures of decline, and that's our total population, right? And our population go up or go down. And for me, our numbers don't tell us anything. Population numbers don't tell us very much. What I like to look at is housing unit numbers. And we know that we've got a fairly stable number of housing units across rural America. And what has gone down, especially when we think about our smaller towns losing population, really what's happening in these communities are twofold. One is our average household size has gone down. So for example, in 1940, the average household size was 3.6, and the average household size today is 2.6. We're down a full person. So even if you had, say, 100 homes in town, you're going to be down 29% of your population just because we don't have as many people in our homes. We don't have as many kids for those that do have children in their household. And really, ideally, today, we have a very common situation at the bottom here, where especially in our rural communities, we have a lot of seniors. And we have a lot of seniors that are passing away. And you have to talk about death here. We're going to talk about some of this. Really, we talk about these seniors. We may have had 2 seniors in the household, and one of them passes away, and what happens? Your population just went down by 1. But that surviving spouse many times stays in that house. So essentially, we have a dynamic right now where our housing stocks are filled. We're filled with fewer people because we have fewer people per household. This is a demographic trend. But I want to remind you that, we've been talking about this workforce housing shortage in rural America for easily 15 years. I know you've been. It's also being talked about with regards to a labor force shortage. And I would argue, and you'll hear me talk about this pretty regularly, that we don't have a labor shortage. We have a housing shortage. It is almost impossible to welcome in a workforce that just retired. So we have had this great retirement of baby boomers, right? And they retire and they stay in our communities, they stay in our homes, and there's really nowhere for these people who just retired to be substituted out. So say I'm an employer in town, and I just watched, 5 employees retire, and they all just stuck around. And I don't have any housing available to substitute that labor in. So how am I going to substitute those people in there? So I really just want to move away from total population. Don't use total population as an indicator of your success and failure. Look at your housing unit stocks. And really, so when you look across aisle from 2010 to 2019, it was 70% of the rural counties lost population, but 90% of rural counties were stable or increased housing units. So how is that, right? We've got one competing narrative that rural is dying based upon population, but on the other hand, our housing stocks are here. So I'm going to look at all our houses as a measure of community wealth, because these homes that people are in were homes to someone before. We hope they're going to be homes to someone in the future. But nobody generally is responsible for all of the housing in town. So number one, I just want to thank you all for being interested in your community and showing up, because it is up to you to talk about the future of your community. When Andrew said that it is about social capital, it's about how well you work together, I'm going to tell you that these trends are happening everywhere. They are happening to every single rural community across this country, and the differential between one community to another is how you respond to it. Do you do something with this information, or are you going to do nothing? Because there's a chance and there's a choice of you to do nothing here. And that's a choice too that has its own costs. So let's look at this. Like, oh, you need homes? Let's just build new homes, right? Presentation over. Like, wait, we don't need to talk about this anymore. We're done. Well, we know that building homes, especially new family construction, is not the solution. We hear it all the time. We just need new family homes. Yeah, the builders have been here, and they told you exactly how much those homes cost, and it's not in the wheelhouse of where we could be in terms of affordability today, especially, I would argue, around workforce housing and the conversations we're having around workforce housing shortfalls. So I want you to prepare for one of the biggest changes you're ever going to witness in your community since the mechanization of agriculture in the early 1900s. So I want to remind you, I want to take you back like 10 or 15 years here. Like even when I was starting to do my demographic work as a rural sociologist, like we look at the older, right, we hear about the grain of rural all the time. And you've got, rural communities are all grain. And you find all these older people in them. And you look at charts like this that are like, here's Muscatine County in the year 2000. And this is the age of our homeowners and renters. The renters are in yellow and the homeowners are in maroon. And when we look at the age group in the year 2000, this is baby boomers. A majority of homeowners in the year 2000 in the county were baby boomers. In the year 2000, now 10 years later, right, these people aged 10 years. So instead of being 35 to 44, they're now 45 to 54, right? You can see it, the whole demographic bump, it moved up. It moved up because these people got older. So literally 10 to 15 years ago, we're like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have all this housing open up because these people typically in the past, they would move out of their homes, up to a third of people would move out of their homes right away after retirement, and that's gonna allow us to welcome in all this new generation. So all of these homes essentially were like, man, they're gonna turn over. And then what happened? What happened? We're still tight on supply. We don't have anywhere for people to live. What happened? So I'd argue this chart explains virtually everything. So historically, in the past, older people, once they hit the age of 67, once they hit that point, they would move out of home ownership rate, right? Here's almost home ownership rate, that's almost around 90%. You know our rural communities have much higher, especially in the upper Midwest, much higher home ownership rates than the rest of the country. It's a great value to have. So our home ownership rates are very high in the past, all previous generations here. But once they hit the age of 67, they would move out. They would move into smaller housing, they would move in with family. There was all these housing decisions that get made that would lead people to move out of these family homes. And then what happens when these folks would move out of their family homes? It opens up that home for a next generation. All previous generations in the past started to move out of their owner-occupied homes at the age of 67. This generation today are staying in their homes. This is the blue line right here. They're staying in their homes longer than ever. You probably know this, right? Like, why would they move? I'm just going to stay in my home. It's paid off. Like, that's great. Let's talk about what this really means from a community point of view when we don't have anywhere for people to live. Because essentially these people are holding onto their homes longer than ever. So even today, 58% of older adults haven't changed residences in more than 20 years. So what's the difference between these two lines right here? See the difference here? This would have been the people that moved out, and these are the people that now stayed. All the area between these two are the people that would have moved out of their homes, which would have made room for people to move in. I hope this makes sense. We have essentially inhibited the ability for us to change over our communities because our older generation is staying in their home longer than ever before. And you see this in the data. So when you look from 2010 to 2020, these are the percentage of homeowners by age. And 24% of homeowners in 2010 were over the age of 65, and that's bumped up to 30% now. And when the number of people just gets older, right, and everybody just stays in their homes, these categories get bigger. This category got bigger because some of these people got older and they moved up into this, some of these people got older and moved up into this category. Now, a full 52% of your homeowners in the county are 55 and older. And these people generally don't have kids. And so you wonder, like, why did my school enrollments go down? Because the percentage of people over the age of 65 went from like 15% 30 years ago to 30% today. This, I hope, makes sense for you. This is a very typical pattern across our rural communities where we have essentially inhibited the ability for younger homeowners to move in because the older homeowners are just staying in their homes. And right now we're starting to see a gap of the younger, this middle-aged people, 45 to 50, I call them middle-aged, right? 45 to 54 are getting smaller because there's no other people moving in and some of these younger people aren't really getting, the younger people are unable to find a home. So this becomes a very interesting thing to look at. We do know And I will tell you that there is a brain gain. This is my primary research. We're not even getting into it today, but there's been a consistent pattern of people moving to our rural communities since the 70s that have essentially filled up our housing stocks. I call it the brain gain. And Andrew mentioned some of this, like when we asked all these newcomers, why did they move to your small town? The top 3 reasons that people give are: number 1 is a simpler pace of life. It's access to recreation, it's getting away from a commute, it's quality of life. Number 2 is safety and security, which is especially high with people with children. And 3rd was the low cost of housing. Now that's relatively speaking. But more importantly for us is, why did people move? They didn't move because they had a job. They don't just always move because they had a job. So right over here on the side there, over there, says just 41% of newcomer households said that they had moved because they had a job or a job offer. And actually that number is now, after the pandemic has hit, went down to 36%, our most recent numbers. So a lot of times we tend to argue that the only reason people are going to move into my community is because they have a job here. Hello, 1920. It really is. That's not how it works today. People are churning and moving into our rural communities with or without a job in town. That job may actually be 2 communities over. That job may be in Chicago. The job may be me being self-employed. Like, employment looks so drastically different today that economic development is failing to follow suit behind it. So meanwhile, we've got local people, local economic developers who are trying to help ensure housing for the existing employers. But meanwhile, you've got remote workers coming in and competing over that very same housing stock. So now, what do we know is that we're going to have a lot of change coming. Like literally, you saw those numbers before, 75% of your homes are going to turn over in the next 20 or 25 years. Through death comes rebirth. And what I mean, people are actually going to pass away. And when people pass away, it literally opens up their house. Like, I mean, so, and we have seen this in Minnesota, that the most rural counties in Minnesota that had the highest death rate also had the highest in-migration rate. When people pass away, their home becomes available for the next generation to move in, and we know 47% of our newcomer households have kids. So imagine 75% of your homes turning over. And then we're bringing in all of those new people over the next 25 years. I am seeing a reinvigoration of our rural communities. We have an opportunity to do this if we welcome people in a respectful, kind way, right? So I'm going to talk about just one population right now, and that's our older population. And really, when I talk about senior housing, a lot of people's eyes are like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. That's just, assisted living. I'm like, oh, I'm not talking about assisted living. There is a continuum of life before you get to a continuum of care in terms of housing. A lot of times, all we talk about is workforce housing or assisted living. And I'm arguing there's a whole continuum of care, a continuum of housing that we're ignoring in here. So what? Our seniors tend to have a policy that makes it very difficult for us to do any planning. What I mean by that is our seniors have a policy of best intentions. A policy of best intentions. What I mean is they say, I'm going to live in my house forever. Well, there's other intentions they have too about when they retire. So, when you ask people like, hey, when do you expect to retire? Just 9% of people say they expect to retire by the age of 60, but in reality, almost 40% do. When you ask people when they're going to retire, 38% of people say, oh, I'm not going to retire until after the age of 70. But only 4% of the population actually makes it that long. So like there's an intention that we have in life, and then there's a reality that hits when we actually have to make a decision. So right now, again, Americans, like most Americans, prefer to die at home, but less than a quarter actually do. So we need to talk about what this looks like. Well, so why don't seniors move right now? And I'm going to talk about this move over housing, because my main argument is these seniors right now are in your workforce housing. They're in your 4-bedroom, 2-bath places that essentially would be a perfect place for a new workforce to move into, but meanwhile, you've got one person living there. And the upstairs bathroom doesn't work, but that's okay, because they never go upstairs. Like, that's ridiculous. Anyway, so you've got people who are staying in their homes. 90% of seniors intend to stay in their homes, as AARP study, but only 43% said they found it very easy to do so. So then we ask people, like, why don't you move? It's right, stress of moving, fear of losing independence, anxiety, emotional ties to the home. But then we also have like a whole age-in-place industry, right? You've heard the term age-in-place, but I would argue we're confusing age-in-place with age-in-the-house. And when we did these studies, I lived in Hancock, Minnesota for a long time, when we did these housing surveys, it was clear that people really want to age in the community. Because what happened was, many times seniors, when they actually expect to live in their house forever, they can't. And then something happens and they have to move out, right? Their policy of best intentions. So then something happens and they've got to move out. And then they look around the community and they find out that all the places in town have a waiting list or there's nothing available. I'm like, oh, maybe we should have planned, right? But like, who does this planning? Who cares about all of this housing? Like, nobody really does. But I would argue, many times this age-in-place strategies actually inhibit the migration. It inhibits the ability for people to consider moving over. So really, many times that just means I'm going to stay in my house forever, as long as I can do that. And we've got incentives, and we've got programs, right? I know we've got programs that serve meals or help with transportation to bring seniors to the doctor's appointments, and all of this. But I would argue that's a fairly sizable investment we're making to keep people in their homes. And then, when you ask people what happens at the end of their life, when you're in emergency mode and something happens. So meanwhile, like for example, my mom, she's like, I'm gonna live in my house forever, right? The policy of best intentions, I'm gonna live in my house forever. So what's my mom do? She puts on a handicap ramp to the house. She expands the bathroom doorway and puts on the handles and things like that, and spends like $15,000 to stay in the house. And then literally a year and a half later, she's forced to move out. And the realtor is telling me like, hey, you know what? Your mom's house has got knob and tube wiring. Like, you need to get that replaced, or there's nobody that's going to be able to buy the insurance on that. And if you really want first-time home buyers to buy your mom's place, you got to paint it, because you can't have any peeling paint to be eligible for a first-time home buyer program. And then my mom's like, what? I just spent $15,000 putting on the ramp and like updating the bathroom. That's not equity builder. That is a pure livability expense. And meanwhile, now all you're doing is eating into your equity at this point. So I would argue now, when you're having to make these decisions, you're in emergency mode, and all of these identifiers around stress and fear and anxiety that you had as to why you wouldn't even consider it now are in front of your face, and you are forced to confront them. So in many ways, I like to, I'm usually a positive guy when it comes to our small towns. Like, hey, we're not all dying, people love our towns generally, but here it's like I want to lift up the stories of disaster where this just didn't work out for my mom, you know? So there's all these reasons that play into our housing decisions that people make, but ultimately we need to help our seniors through this. And right now, there is nobody, as I mentioned, responsible. And aging in our home long term actually increases the likelihood that dilapidated housing will increase. So what is the public cost of private inaction? What if my mom does nothing to take care of the home? So for example, let me give this example here. So let's say in my community, there are 4 homes, and this is last year, right? There are 4 homes in my community. I know you have more than that. And each of those homes brought in $1,000 in property tax revenue. Well, what happens if my mom's house ends up being torn down, right? I tear down the house. Now, what's assessed? What gets assessed then at that point? There's no structure on it, so there's just the land that gets assessed. So my property tax bill went down from $1,000 to $200. Now, what's the county do? Because my neighbor or my mom's house got torn down. Does the county say, like, oh, we lost the house, we got to reduce our levy? Certainly not. Who is paying for my mom's bad decisions? It's everybody else in town. Everybody else's property taxes are going to go up because of the reduction in that one dilapidated property. So now there is a public cost to private inaction. We typically think, like, I'm not going to tell them, you know, my neighbor's mom what to do in her house. Why would I do that? That's her house. It's a private asset. But at the same time, that house is a public good, I would argue. That house was a home to someone in the past. We want that home to be someone in the future, the house to be a home for someone in the future too. We're not sure what that really looks like. So really all housing is a community concern, not just the dilapidated housing, not just the LMI housing. So Jody's here, you'll hear from her. Like the LMI houses are served, but there's a much broader kind of venue we need to look at when it comes to all of our housing across the community and being concerned for. So when it comes to our seniors, we know that equity in their home is like the #1 thing they've got in terms of their net worth. And we could be actually advancing the conversation about shifting their equity onto a new place. And what would that look like? It's like patio homes. And this has been the #1 avenue of growth we've seen. And that is we can't afford really to put up workforce housing, again, the 5-bedroom, 2-bath, 4-bedroom, 2-bath place. But when we talk about patio homes, when seniors move over and into this more appropriate housing, it opens up their house for supply. There, again, I mentioned the inhibiting factors are stress and fear, but we really need to lift up some of these stories about what it looks like. And you've got some now, these patio homes, these senior-friendly floor plans. They provide landscaping or just maintenance services for you. And you've got some in the community right now. So when you offer this kind of move over housing, you are opening up your housing stocks. So why should we care? Like, right, economic developers, why should you care? Seniors, they aren't even in the workforce. I don't care about them. And this is tongue-in-cheek, right? So, right, why should you care about the senior population? Because right now there's something called a transfer receipt. When you think about all of the dollars coming into the Muscatine County every day, just 56% of all the dollars coming in come from a job. Another 40% of your income comes from old age Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, dividends, interest, and rent. And the biggest portion of that is, where is this here? Transfer receipts. It's in the red bar. Right now, 24% of all the income coming into the county comes in the form of a transfer receipt. That's right up here. And that's just Social Security, not like retirement accounts. And it also includes Medicare and Medicaid. So imagine right now, all of these dollars, a majority of them are dedicated to a senior population that currently is living there. So what happens now if this older population does not have move over housing? When they're forced to move over, they're going to move out of your community. And what are they going to do? They're going to take all these transfer receipts with them. This is so significant. I don't think it can be stated loudly enough the extent to which the medical and health industry currently is developed in your community because of this older population. So again, are you ready to lose 25% of all your income because you don't have move over housing for people? This is the question. So this is very interesting time to look at, your local economy is only going to become more integrated with senior activities and senior services. So maybe thinking more broadly about this move over housing as your economic development opportunity, right? And move over housing is the opportunity, and currently the equity in their home may be their only equity. So there's a human case to here too, that whenever you build more housing, you're providing more affordable housing. And we do know, Shauna's got this, we're going to be looking and doing more research on this, but what's the economic case? What's the return on investment for housing, especially for affordable housing? Because right now, when we have people in households that are in unaffordable housing, their rates of self-rated health, hypertension, arthritis, all these things are through the roof. So there are actual economic costs, healthcare costs related to taking care of people who are now having to spend much more money, and Andrew mentioned this, like that 30% number. What percentage of homeowners are in housing burden households? This makes a difference. When you don't have money to spend on the house, you don't have money to spend on food insecurity. Right there, 76% of households in unaffordable housing are living in a food insecure household. So there are costs to this. There are investments we can make in housing that can have a return, because ultimately there are real costs here. There are real costs to having an unaffordable home, and there are real benefits. And there's payback period on this one, for example. Even if we were to invest in providing workforce housing around $45,000, there's still overall costs that we're saving. Yes, it's not a direct financial investment that we see every day. This is people living healthier lives. This is us spending a smaller percentage of our income on our home that can result in us spending a larger portion of income on our family, on our health, on our food, and other things. So I just can't thank you guys enough for making sure that your community is somewhere for people to live. So for me, housing stock is the key. Generally, again, Jody can't just be the only one looked at. It's like, hey, we're talking about housing, let's talk to Jody. She's talking about the LMI housing. I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about everybody in town and about the demands and pressures that we've got around this minimal amount of housing that we've got available. And how can we make that more available and ensure that that housing stock is going to be in a good enough shape for the next generation? So maybe we should be concerned about community success. Maybe one of the best things you can do for the future of your community is ensure there's somewhere for people to live. And more broadly, this plays into succession plans, not just for your homes, but also for leadership and for your businesses. So again, thank you for showing up today and actually being concerned about your community and wanting to write your narrative, because really everything I've seen in terms of your data shows great growth and opportunity, and it is. The social capital you're developing through the foundation and other organizations in your community matter. So with that, I don't know if we've got questions. I don't know exactly how you want to end this, but I will pass it back to Charlotte.
Ben, we thank you so much.
Ben, it is so great to be here once again. How many years have you been doing this? 3? We've been here every single year, and it keeps getting better and better. I have to say I enjoyed the first 2 speakers immensely. In fact, Andrew, Iowa could actually be your test case for your economic framework because we've been following this now since 2011. I just kept saying ditto, ditto, ditto. So again, just to remind everyone of how we approach growth in Iowa is we take a very holistic approach because I too don't know where economic development and community development begin and end because the lines are so blurred today in particular. So it is all about developing a business culture in which our businesses can prosper. And that's everything from taxation, regulatory, workforce development, infrastructure investments, whether it's transportation, intermodal, whether it's wastewater treatment and water quality. But it is more important today that we build communities in which people want to live. And that's all about placemaking, right? It's all about creating quality of life initiatives and housing. And then of course, we are in the people business because everything we do from economic development at the state level is we're investing in those policies and those political capital, if you will, that we want those opportunities that actually raise standard of living for Iowans. So it's about providing opportunities in which our citizens can thrive, right? So it's about creating prosperity for businesses, the climate, but it's about creating an environment where communities can thrive and our citizens. And again, we've been following this very successfully since 2011. So again, kind of picking up where the other two speakers left off, Iowa's biggest challenge is we have a population problem, and we've had a population problem for a very long time, pre-COVID. Now, COVID certainly exaggerated it, if you will, right? And so the very first thing I say, and Andrew and I were talking about my grandchildren, is that we do need to birth more children. So any of you in the room that can do that, I would encourage you to do so. And I told that to my children, they took me up, and I am now the grandmother of 4 grandsons, certainly the light of my life. But it is interesting to see what happened during COVID. When Iowa went into COVID, we had a very high labor participation number. It was about 70.3%, second highest in the country, meaning everyone that can work in the workforce, from those that are 18 plus to retirement age, are working, right? So what happened during COVID? Well, we lost a lot of workforce, and we are just now beginning to inch our way up to where we were pre-COVID. We're not there yet, but we're certainly making great strides. So what does that look like? And so this is just a snapshot in time, right? So this was one day in June. You could go there today, it's gonna look a little different, but you're gonna see the number of job openings we have is about double, at least double, the number of people that we have unemployed. And I would tell you that so many companies today, and I'm sure, Rich, that includes you don't even list everything in IWT's site, right? Some positions have just been open for a very, very long time. So we, again, have more jobs than we have people. But what happened in COVID? Well, first of all, in Iowa, in particular, retirees work many years past their retirement age, right? COVID changed that because nobody knew what tomorrow was going to bring. Right? So we saw people exiting. At the other time, if you think about it, financially, that's when our 401ks were extremely healthy at that time. I will tell you today, I just stopped shredding mine as soon as they come in the door. At least I'm looking at them now, right? It's a little better. So retirees left. Now again, they are beginning to find their way back. And they're finding their way back because of inflation. The cost of living is much higher today. It is a different environment. Women exited in massive numbers. And why is that particularly important in Iowa? Because we have one of the highest dual income workers in a household, right? Now, again, what was going on? 33% of our child care facilities closed, right? We were trying to do online learning. And, that's a very difficult thing to navigate. And so again, nationally, and you're seeing the same in Iowa, that they're coming back in record numbers. Manufacturing, and the reason I show that, because that's who we are, right? Manufacturing is Iowa's largest gross state product. We are a manufacturing powerhouse. And again, coming back stronger, but I will tell you that there is some, what I would say, our economy is somewhat fragile, meaning that durable good manufacturing is still very, very strong. But non-durable goods, we're starting to see some real softness in coming forward. The one group I didn't put on here that is most alarming, that is not coming back in any kind of record numbers, that is still sitting on the sidelines, and it's not just Iowa, it's nationally, it's young men, 25 to 35. Now, where the hell are they? I don't know. I don't know if they're back in their parents' basements who should be selling their house and now, giving it to another group of people. Maybe that's what the issue is. If we all sold our big houses, then we wouldn't have any basements for our kids to come home to. Or perhaps they're just, out finding themselves. I don't know, but they need to find themselves back to work, is all I can say. Now, the good news for Iowa is we have seen net migration increase. A lot of that is immigration. In fact, Iowa will have its first county by the year 2030 that the minority will be the majority population, if not sooner. In fact, the one county in the state that did not see an increase in minority population is actually doing a major outreach to particularly Latinos, inviting them to come, working on housing for them to buy and businesses for them to open, right? Because we understand Iowa looks very different today. And if we're going to reach these goals that we need for that exit of baby boomers, which statistically, the number is about 10,000 a day that are exiting the workforce across all sectors nationally, we can't get there from here. And yes, we need to birth more babies, but that's a little organic. It's going to take longer. So we have to bring people to Iowa. The good news is we're doing that. Number one for in-migration to the state last year was the state of California. 3 counties in California, right? We can actually, because the Department of Transportation, actually in Iowa, you have to surrender your license, your driver's license, when you come in a very short period of time. Well, I convinced the DOT, not by individual name, but by aggregate, that we should have access to that. And so we have access to that database. So we know exactly where people are moving from, right? We know in New York what county they're coming from, right? Now, I don't understand the Hawaii thing. That seems a little bit like an outlier, so we'll see. That's confusing to me. So we'll see if that holds true. The nice thing is, and it's not surprising, policies matter. Illinois, people are fleeing out of Illinois, right? And of course, we're one of the recipients of that. The also good news is a reverse trend. In the Omaha MSA with Omaha and Council Bluffs, we're beginning to see, we used to be all out migration to Omaha. That is completely reversed. But if you think about it, first of all, if you haven't been to Council Bluffs for many years, you should go. It's unbelievable the investment they're making in placemaking and quality of life. It is just transformed, and it is closer to get to work if you're downtown in that business district, living in Council Bluffs, than in the outskirts of Omaha. And so we're beginning to see that. So what do? So we looked at, during COVID, because we run the tourism department, right? And we also know there's a great connection between workforce recruitment and tourism. And again, if you think intuitively, you go to a place and you have a great experience, do you think, it crosses my mind, I can see myself living here, right? I think that's natural. My son and daughter-in-law are architects in the Hamptons. Now, I will tell you that Joel and I go out there once a year to see the grandsons. And not the kids, of course, the grandsons. You did notice that, right? So we go out there to see the grandsons, and it is beautiful in the Hamptons. It is very rural, right? Very rural. And we think, well, maybe we could see ourselves living here. But then reality kicks in, and you can't live in the Hamptons unless you have a trust fund, right? And so reality does hit in. So, but what we did is we said, okay, did COVID change the way you look at the place you call home? And we did a national survey with Flesh and Helen, who does all of our marketing and research for us, and asked this very question. And 7 out of 10 said yes, they would consider relocating. The thing I love about this slide is the young demographics, because I am closer to retirement than not, and so we need these people here to support me in my retirement, right? So you got 30-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 40-year-olds. Now, this is brand new data. When we first researched and said the question, what would you move for? It was still cost of living, number one. The second thing was economic vitality. So disagreeing a little bit with the previous speaker, it wasn't so much that they were looking for opportunity for economically. But what they were wanting to know is if I move and do this whole disruptive thing called moving, and it doesn't work out, is there another gig in the marketplace that can use my skill sets? Third was arts and culture, quality of life, outdoor rec, third and fourth, right? And of course, again, you want to be connected the whole time because they want to share that experiences as they're experiencing those trails, including what they had for lunch today, right? Which is baffling to me. But needless to say, this is new data. So here we are, cost of living now is number one from Bros News data for this demographics that's looking moving. Public safety, again, now that was the previous speaker also said that, is becoming more and more prevalent. And if you think about it, why not? Because every time we turn on some news show, we're just inundated. Or you go to cities, I have to tell, like Minneapolis, have any of you been to downtown Minneapolis? It is a shadow of what it used to be, right? It is a travesty to what's happening in some of our cities. And then arts and culture and outdoor rec and all of that. So what we did is launched a national ad campaign. We went into market 3 times and it worked. So then we went out and measured it, our positives. Now the final question that we did ask the first test group though, right? After we asked what would you move for, we asked them, you know, our question was, we were so excited by the responses because we said, wow, we check all the boxes. What do you think of Iowa? And their response was, where's Iowa? And where exactly? And do you grow potatoes? So we had a little bit of education to do. So we spent millions and millions of dollars in market doing a national ad campaign on all the networks and cable stations and streaming sessions, and we wrapped it around with influencers, and then we tested it. So first of all, now they know who we are. So our positives are up by 20%. Our negatives actually went down by 50, but in full disclosure, it was only like 11% to begin with because they didn't know who the hell we were, right? But look at the landscape question, because I love this, because the other thing they thought about is Iowa was just flat corn, right? Those that really did know, at least thought they knew something. Apparently they've never ridden Red Rut, because I don't think there's a flat route in all of Red Rut, right? And so our positive, look at 67% now, and then the friendliness of our people. So we saw all of that. So, but what's the impediment to growth now, right? Well, there was 2 things prior to COVID. It was housing, because that's great, we're going to grow our population, but again, where are we going to put them? The second one was broadband connectivity, but the state, in partnership with the private sector, has spent about $1 billion in broadband, and so that's not really registering as much, because people find that that's almost like a good schools, right? Not that they don't care about schools, Glenn, it's just that that's a given. It's kind of like we expect good schools, that's part of the equation. All right, so this is our newest research that we did on housing. So this is our demand. If you saw this presentation last year, it was 42,000. So the numbers are that we changed our database system because when we went in and tested some numbers, we saw that they weren't actually picking up building permits and some things that we have in the queue. Because Derek will tell you, right now under construction, just in IFA portfolio, we have about 5,000 units actually in construction. This does not include all the awards that we've just awarded that's not there. So we feel that this is a lot better. The concern is, for me though, is now it's really going to be all more about location of the houses, because we will reach this goal. I'm absolutely convinced we will. We'll exceed this goal. The challenge for us is going to be, though, we have to be more strategic about where we're placing the housing and what kind of housing we're placing in communities. So the conversation has now changed, because we need much more single-family homes, which really plays up to what that previous speaker said. I thought that was unbelievable. So I'm sitting there, and Rich and I were talking, we need to figure a way to incentivize people to get out of these homes. Because really, I don't know how we go in and stick build in a working family or workforce housing to make that affordable with people rather than using existing inventory. So for me, from a policy point of view of the state, I think we need to figure out how to come alongside and help you. So again, our big thing is now, you're gonna see us when we open new rounds of housing, we may even get to a point, Derek's hearing this for the very first time, which is often where people hear what we're gonna do next. So we're gonna have to maybe say next time that developers, you're going to need a project in Muscatine, right? Or we're going to need you in this region, and this is what you're going to build, and we're going to give more incentives. Do you like that? I saw you a thumbs up or something, or were you talking about something else?
55 and over.
Yes, okay, there you go. All right, so anyway, so we need to, I think we're going to have to figure that out on our incentives. The good news is that, again, when we know that affordability is the number one thing cost of living people are looking for, I was ranked still the number one state for affordability in housing, right? So the cost of living here is really going well for us. We talked about cost burden. This is the most recent data. Carla, what was you, I think you all are more like at 41% of your population. Is that, did I see that one of your slides that was running through? This is still concerning to us. And these are the type of workers that we're talking about that are paying this. You know, it is always discouraging to me, I will tell you, when one of our projects, our federal tax credit projects, come forward. And we just had in fact, Derek and I and Deanna got to spend an evening in a community in Northwest Iowa at a town hall meeting that I wish we had done before they voted it out, because it was a federal program which are extremely difficult to do in rural communities to begin with. Secondly, you had one of the best developers in the state doing it, so their product is first class. And they voted it down because they didn't want it in their backyard. And they didn't want those people there. So let's talk about, these are the faces of those people, right? And I will tell you, this, I really do a little bit get on my high horse on this, because first of all, as a Christian and as an Iowan, I think it is unacceptable that we do not welcome, if people are good enough to work in our communities, they should be good enough to live in our communities with dignity. And if you think about it, these are the very people that kept our economy open when those of us who had cushy jobs could work in our basements, right? This is wrong. And the thing is, you don't even know who's behind what door. Because these projects have, first of all the apartments or, you know, the rental units are the same amenities. You don't know who's 100% paying market rate, who's paying 30%, who's paying 60%. You don't even know who's behind what door, right? Which is, to me, exactly how it should be. And so we have to begin to share the narrative. But IFA has to also be willing to look at things differently. And so we mixed it up this last year on our QAP for our federal housing credits. So first of all, we said we want new products, right? We want to see, and we did this competition. And so these people won. It's an incredible, it's a transitioning, very urban neighborhood in Des Moines. Diversity, the minority population is very, very high here. And we have, again, an incredible developer who does great stuff. And so they're going to do this new project. Not only are it's certified something, I don't even remember. What is it, living or letting, or what kind of building is it? Living building. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds good. But it's apparently it's very hard to get this, apparently, because it's the only one in Iowa so far. So it's a living building. It'll be certified, so we can all look that up and learn what that is. But they're going to do these food court things in the bottom. So they'll have like 6 kind of small kitchens where small entrepreneurs in the community can come in, because they also kind of, there's a little food desert there, and then they can do businesses. And plus it just looks super cool, doesn't it? I mean, isn't that great? I just love it. So anyway, that's our innovation award. The other thing, of course, is we need to print homes. And again, Muscatine, first in the state, is that right? Lennox also has a developer that's doing one. You know, this is not where it needs to be, but I guarantee you in 5 years, this is going to be standard mode of operation. And I so appreciate you all stepping up saying we're going to incubate this here. So we formed a partnership with Iowa School of Design, the Architect School and the Engineering School to basically build the ecosystem. So they're testing materials in the concrete, because the concrete's a problem, right? I mean, like what do you do with, wind blades that have outused their time? Well, you do not store them on I-35, which they were doing for a while. In fact, that's not happening anymore. So we're going to grind them up, test them in the concrete. So we're working on biomass products that can bring down the carbon zero, to these building supplies. The things are also, think about it, these buildings aren't going anywhere. They're concrete bunkers. So the insurance ratings on these should be higher. The energy efficiency is extremely high. So we have a ways to go, but this is the future. And again, once again, Muscatine, is leading on this. So it does take collaboration to do this and public partnerships. The other thing we did is thriving communities, right? So here's what we said, is developers, it's easy for developers to go to urban centers and markets that they know, right? It de-risks it for them, they understand the lay of the land, they know they have a population base that's gonna make this thing cash flow, but it's not where we need housing. And so again, we said, and this was Derek and the team, very creative. Actually, one of our value propositions at IEDA and IFA is we lead with innovation, because if you think about it, government is a huge enterprise. You want government to be innovative. And we said, what if we turn the table? What if we would give points, because these projects come down to sometimes 1 to 2 point difference on who wins and who doesn't, right? They're that tight in scoring. What if we turn the table and gave the points to communities so that you get courted by developers, right? And then we did a little matchmaking of that for you. And so that's what we did. We looked at this thriving community, and these are the attributes that we were looking at, right? It all is part of, you look at that, Andrew, a lot of that is your economic foundation, right? And so we wanted to know who's doing things. We had 37 applicants, 11 finalists, and it is not surprising that Muscatine made the list. Because of things like this you're doing, and every time I come back in the 3 years from when we started, I get more excited because you're working the plan, right? You're making a difference, you're moving the needle. And so congratulations to you. So now I'm gonna ask Amber and Derek to come up, and because they actually did the scoring, and they're the brainchild with the team at IEDA and IFA of what this looked like. So we're going to ask them to provide insight into this initiative and how this came about.
Thanks, Debbie. From my perspective, I travel a lot in rural Iowa, and I see a lot of communities, as Debbie said, they're doing the right things. They're doing community development extremely well, business development, economic development. They're still struggling with housing. And so Derek and the team came up with this Thriving Communities concept so that we could help incentivize those communities and make them a little bit more visible to our developers and matchmake those two. It's a process that helps communities, right, to attract developers. It helps developers as they get those points in the process. And then long term, it helps our other communities to look to Muscatine and our other finalists and say, this is what they have done to become a Thriving Community designee. So we can start to follow that path. We can reach out to Muscatine and learn from them. And so it's also a mentoring opportunity.
Definitely an amazing experience. We launched this in the spring of this year in very short notice. We had, I think, 2 months at most to call out to the communities and really challenge them to lift up ideas. We received 37 applications. I mean, in 2 months, communities came forward. I mean, there's just this need, this hunger for housing and for community out there. The presentations were amazing. I just can't even, tell you about the ideas. I mean, we had 20 presenters come through. They brought everybody. They brought CEOs of companies. They brought mayors. They brought local leaders, nonprofits across the board. These are all about partnerships. I mean, this is what makes it go, is the partnerships. The ideas that came through, I mean, we'll talk about some of them here pretty soon, but they were just astounding. And the whole point of this really, the points are the short term, as kind of Amber said. One round of points is great. We might get a project, but what's really lasting is the ideas. So if communities that were or were not designated can find ideas, latch on to partnerships, build in their community, and it's more sustainable. Maybe they have 5, 10, 15 years more of ideas that are, or programs or other initiatives that can be a launching point for future innovations.
Very good. All right, so talk about the review team that we put together. Oh, the next slide. Okay. All right.
So Muscatine just absolutely knocked it out of the park. I mean, amazing in terms of the innovation, the partnerships, just over and over and through. And it's not just, I think my quote up there is just fearlessness, absolute fearlessness to try something new, to lead with innovation, even if it may be a little challenging. I know the 3D printing is challenging, but that's how you started. Hopefully 5 years from now, it's something we can look back at. But it's that willingness to go forward and not worry about what people think in terms of, oh, it doesn't work right now, but we're going to make it work though.
And as we've heard from other presenters today, it's more than just a job or home. People want to live somewhere where they have community, right? And so to me, it was a holistic approach that Muscatine has taken. It's not just about a house or a job, but it's also about the quality of life, the amenities, and the community. The other point I think Muscatine really shined was that workforce category. So we had the 6 categories for the application, and the workforce retention was one that really tripped up a lot of communities, honestly. But Muscatine had those relationships already. That wasn't something that a community could do in 2 months, right? When they found out about this opportunity, if you didn't have those relationships with your large employers, it was too late to demonstrate that. But Muscatine really shined in that area.
Good. All right, anything else you want to add here? Okay. All right. All right, give us some examples. Okay.
I'll talk about Manning. So Manning is a pretty small town. It's near Carroll. It's around 1,500 in population. So I think among the 11 communities that are designated as thriving, we have populations from as low as 600 up to 200,000. So we really run the gamut there. But in Manning, we talked about our NIMBYs, right? And the folks that are struggling and that are house burdened. And Manning came in and said, those people are us. And that was a moment that our committee won't forget. They really demonstrated their willingness for housing for all, and it was very apparent to us. Now, as I said, they're a small community, but they have $1.2 million to put towards this development. To kind of put that in perspective, that would be like Carroll funding a $10 million project, or the city of Des Moines funding a $242 million towards a project. So it was a huge lift for that community, but they understand the value and they were ready to take part.
Another example is Dubuque. Most cities have some of the same tools. We have TIF, we have abatement, we have different ways of providing resources, but one thing they were finding from their developers was a 10-year just wasn't enough. And for their community, important parties of their community, adding an extra 5 years in the backside, so stacking TIF with abatement to make it a 15-year, made it much more attractive for the affordable housing developers who need a 15-year to get by with the initial compliance period. It's really kind of innovation to say, hey, we're willing to invest in this housing for this population, or this need here is really important.
Innovative work you're doing and the partnerships that you've created. I'd also love to see other communities nearby applying for the Thriving Community designation next year, West Liberty and Wilton. Hope to see your names on our list for the next round.
So thank you, Jody. This is the boundaries of the, sorry, back a second.
Yeah, maybe.
Of the designated area for the Iowa Thriving Communities in Muscatine. So this is the area that Muscatine has chosen to focus on for this next round for the workforce housing tax credits. That program is, it allows for single family development, duplex, row homes, apartment buildings, 8plexes, upper story rehab, anything pretty much can be done here. And this is the area they're focused on. This area will receive some extra scoring incentive. So please talk to your folks at the city to get support, but we would love to see a blitz on this area to get projects done with different developers meeting the needs in the community.
The time just to say thank you to Debbie and the Iowa Finance Authority and the IADA teams for considering and selecting Muscatine as one of the 11 inaugural Thriving Communities. The reason I think that I have the wrong presentation is because go the right direction. Okay. So just thank you. But designation acknowledges not just the work that we've been doing, but it really supports the fact that we have strong partnerships in our community to make things move forward. And it was the catalyst of those the more formalization of those partnerships that really catalyzed the development that has been able to take place over the next 3 years. But the partnership really started with the development of the housing plan. And the housing plan, as many of you know, is called Ignite Vitality for Workforce Housing. It's the basis of this conversation pretty much every year so far. And it was based on the findings from the 2017 Housing Needs Assessment and market conditions at those times. These are the 6 goals that were established in that plan, And they were then adopted by the City Council and the Muscatine County Board of Supervisors. Again, those partnerships were all working in the same direction. But to do so, it's not just about building, as Debbie talked about. It's not just about putting a unit online. It's not about having a new project underway. It does talk about the people. We have a partnership with MCSA through the Muscatine Municipal Housing Agency, which most people don't know, but that's a county-wide initiative anyway. Everything that the authority does is actually based on Muscatine County, not just the city, even though we are a department of the city. And so in that process, we have partnered for a number of years with this housing navigator, and for less than $500 a month, less than $500 on average, we assist more than 500 families a year to retain and sustain their housing conditions, preventing them from falling into homelessness so that we don't experience the cascading costs that come with that, or the trauma that comes to the family. We also have operated a housing counseling program since 2010. Housing counseling program was primarily focused on home ownership education, and then just before the pandemic, we started a renter education component to that. There has always been a piece of that actually provides down payment assistance to first-time home buyers. Originally it was $500, and then it becomes $750, and then $1,000. Today you can get up to $2,500, but even better yet, thanks to the Iowa Finance Authority, we were recently notified, literally like 2 weeks ago, that we are receiving a $315,000 grant to provide up to $20,000 worth of assistance for first-time home buyers that earn less than 80% of the area median income. So, but we'll go back to putting some units online. In the past 2 years, so plan's been in place for 3 years, set a goal of 300 units, new units online in those 3 years, and then improving 900 units. In the first 2 years, we actually created 171 units countywide and 1,600 units, full apartments for rehab and repair. Those are all assisted. That's like private investment, which is an even better thing. But 1,600 units. So we've kind of blown some of those numbers out of the water, and we've continued to do that because in the current year we have 200. I forgot to add the extra units. We have about 100 and I can't do math off the fly. 331 units that are either under construction or completed in the past 12 months. And that's in Wilton, West Liberty, and Muscatine. So we are seeing that success throughout the county. And most of those are, and we have another 98 units that are currently in some phase of the design, so that should be under construction in the next 12 months, not past 12 months. In West Liberty, there also are a number of units with some rehab, so there are currently 122 units of rehab planned with government assistance. And then in Wilton, they have their first, I think it's their first, low-income housing tax credit, at least in a very long time, completed this year. Chandler Point, which provided 35 units of housing for households 55 and older, as well as a couple of new single-family houses. Am I doing something wrong? And it must, that explains it. In Muscatine, we'll get there in a minute. So new units doesn't always mean new construction. We have 2 units actually through the downtown investors and that are supported with an IEDA grant to convert. Can you do it? Up there, I don't see it. I'm not a bad enough speaker, now I have TA problems too. IT problems, sorry, I can't even speak. Nope. Anyways. Oh, we're going scuba diving too, excellent. as you can see in this upper left-hand corner, this, the upper story of the old bank building is being converted, underutilized commercial space is being converted into 2 market rate units as well. But then we also have additional 55 unit plus property, which we actually opened between the 3 properties, 147 units in this past 12 months. And then we have a family project up there on the right as well. So we are hitting all of the segments of the market, but they're primarily segments of the market that are meeting those definitions that Jen talked about with the lower income wages, the retail workers, the medical aides, so the CNAs, the pharmacy techs, and some of those other lower income earners. However, while we haven't made substantial progress on assisting with rehabilitation, we do have, I lost track, some policies in place that will help with addressing those deteriorated properties. One of those is code to just address the deterioration of properties that will either likely become uninhabitable if they're left unchecked or are impacting their neighboring properties by their deteriorated state. The next one is property maintenance code, which allows us to go out and mandate a fix to a property that is deteriorating, either through a voluntary repair or through citation process. And then we have funding for demolition of vacant and abandoned properties that are beyond repair, AKA this top left building. And then, so we demoed that property in 2020. I gotta remember what year it is. 2021. And then, so this is in 2022. This is what the property looked like. And just last week, or earlier this week, we signed papers with the Habitat for Humanity chapter to build a unit. This isn't the unit they're planning to build. This is just a pretty property that we could find that wasn't extravagant, which was the request. However, and we've seen success in all of this programs. So like this, taking it from derelict property to revitalization is the goal of that standard, but also with the properties that are cited, they're sent a notice for fix your building or else kind of deal. We've had half of those buildings actually voluntarily comply. So of the 31 notices have been sent, more than 16 of them have actually voluntarily complied within the past 9 months. And then we also have demolished 14 additional structures that were beyond repair. The jurisdictions provide financial assistance for housing projects through tax increment financing and tax abatement. But most of the properties that we've seen built to date have been through some subsidy program. And again, back to they're targeting those lower income families. And now we need to talk about what do we do with the people who need housing that are, as a common word that's out there today, is go over the cliff. They're no longer eligible for a low-income subsidy. They can't apply for a voucher. They can't qualify for these properties, but they still can't afford the market rate housing. According to the National Home Builders Association, it costs about $190,000 currently to build a 1,600 square foot house in this region. It doesn't seem too bad, though I get the feeling with the lack of clarity on the website that it was absent of the cost of land and infrastructure, so which would substantially change that. And it is often more efficient or more cost effective, at least, to purchase a home that is existing. And fortunately, that price has actually gone down in the past, well, unfortunately, I'm not really sure at this moment, has gone down in the past 12 months. So the median sales price was $175,000 in August of 2023. With the median income of $50,800, the news is that they match. That's been a first for a while, it feels like. However, they match if somebody has a $20,000 down payment or they have absolutely no debt. And young professionals seeking these types of houses often come with some debt called student loan, which kicks them right out. Or maybe they went out and they needed a car because the gremlin isn't working anymore. So, but we continue, the city does continue to, the partnerships that we have, the Housing Council, continues to work on promoting and demonstrating ways that we can address both housing and quality of life issues within our community. The primary way we do this is through Ignite Ignite Vitality, the Mulberry Project, which is only possible because after our first housing summit, Debbie called back and talked to our previous member who we were sad to have seen leave, Santos, and said, I want you to put a pilot program together. And so we did that. And we've been working through those granting processes since that time. But in this neighborhood, NCSA went ahead and proceeded with purchasing a number of properties for rehabilitation, for future planned projects, which we'll talk a little about. And so they purchased not both of these properties, but the property on the left, 605. And we're starting to see how a neighborhood revitalization project is supposed to work. And if you didn't see this sign in front of the one that's NCSA, you would not, would you guess which one was subsidized? And when they did this improvement, the neighbor went ahead and took the chance to. In addition, they purchased this other property, which is actually right next to the one that they had the sign in before. But this one will actually be demolished to construct a 21-unit permanent supportive housing project, which will have 24-hour on-site supervision to help with people recovering from homelessness, which is really a plus. One of the benefits of this neighborhood is it's both near downtown, it is near the NCSA services. So one of the beauties of our community, right, is we can pick things and do things that make geographical sense as well as economic sense. Now, we will be continuing to work in this neighborhood and are anticipating demolishing at least 6 properties that will be used for rebuilding, again, infill sites. Some of the beauties, not all of the beauties, but some of these will be rebuilt with 3D housing, but I think one of the beauties of this process is that it not only says we're going to test the new technology, but also we're looking at how do you infill on sites that are often smaller than your average building site today. So we're looking at how do we adjust our own policies and process, and how do we work with developers when you have a property that is 40 feet wide instead of 60 feet wide. And what can you do that makes them both properties retain safety without becoming a shotgun house. And all of this is important because in September, I had 3 employees say that between the 3 of them, they had more than 200,000 openings in their employee base. And that is anticipated to grow because all 3 of those properties have some expansion plans, and there is another property or another industry who actually also has an expansion plan. So there's going to be another 78 positions open up in the next 5 years. And again, where are we going to put them? Fortunately, as Debbie alluded to, we have strong partnerships with our industry, and they are already engaged in the process of supporting housing markets, supporting the community, and taking those next steps. H&I and Kent both have met with the city to talk about what are their employees looking for, like how do we attract them, what type of housing and what locations work for them, because it's not the field of dreams. You can't build it and they'll come. It just doesn't work that way. And so West Liberty Foods is planning they're looking at how do they implement a program that provides support services for their employees that would include supporting housing needs. And then Kent actually already requires executive level employees to live in the community, and they struggle to find some places for those folks to live. And finally, I just recently learned, which was like the most exciting thing I've learned for a while, maybe not a terribly long while, but a while, is that we actually have a very small business in town, 15 employees, who provided direct financial assistance to 2 of their 15 employees to purchase a home so that they could retain those employees and recognize the benefit they added to their community. We're always open to talking to any business that wants to talk about how employer-assisted housing might work for you or for the community as a whole. The next thing is, as Debbie talked about, the 3D printing. The Community Foundation really jumped. As a housing council, we were looking at how do we be innovative, what are the options? And the Community Foundation really took the lead and said, we're going to go and contract, and we're going to build 10 of these houses. And so they have started building the first one. Not the smoothest process for the past few months, but I think everybody's learned a lot and we're getting there. So this is kind of what the process looked like in the first one, and now we're building a second one, and we'll get there. But it is the foundation's commitment to providing affordable housing in an effective way that also is sustainable for the community to meet those needs. That is really the most important part. The next phase of that will actually be incorporating the Muscatine Community College, who is committed to both training workers on the 3D construction process, as well as then potentially looking at how can we change the creek mix to be more sustainable on its own, similar to what Debbie was talking about with the recycling of materials. We're talking about how to use hemp fibers to strengthen that. And so one of the other partnerships we have is the Community Foundation, the Muscatine County Board of Supervisors, and the City of Muscatine, all partnered together to fund a community grant writer. Through the grant writer, we have written a large number of applications, so 19 applications, 12 that were specific to housing and neighborhood development activities. We've received 8 of those, have been awarded, totaling more than $4.6 million. And in addition, the city also, because of the technical need for this one, hired an entity to write a lead hazard reduction grant, which will bring just under $3 million over the next 4 years to support the removal of hazardous conditions within housing for those families with children under 5, such as lead, radon, those types of things. And then but we have a lot of knowledge, we've done a lot of work, but where do we go from here? And so, here is my ask. The world has changed. Again, I think people have been talking about that all day long. People age, young people change what they want. Like, we talk a lot about how people don't want the same type of housing. A lot of times we talk about 20s and 30s and the early 40s, and they're talking more about functionality of space and open space, not your typical farmhouse, I'm just saying. And how that footprint can be smaller as long as it works and provides them the opportunity to also live the lifestyle they want. So how do we meet those needs? So we're doing a project. Surprise. We have a housing survey. So on your table, each of you will find a table tent that includes a QR code to a housing survey that's provided both in English and Spanish for you and all your best friends and family to complete, because doing the housing survey is dependent on having the broadest array of input we can to get everybody's input. And in this case, we're not even talking about, do you live in Muscatine? If you have employees that live in Moline or Bettendorf, please have them fill it out as well. And if this is not convenient, please do it before you leave today. That'd be great for us. But feel free to take home the little invitation and hand it out again to whomever. If you'd like a stack of them, I'm sure we can come up with a stack of them to put in break rooms. So that, again, we can use that information to provide input into what comes next. A key component of the housing study is actually looking at the workforce and what do individuals who commute to the community for work want. Why do they choose or need to live elsewhere? And in those, the issue is, if I live in Bettendorf, back to it, it's a drive, and we have winters sometimes. But also, other things happen. The economy changes. Hello, high gas prices. Hello, somebody else needs a teacher down the road. So and then you can start to see where the economics change. You know, we used to have a saying, drive till you can afford it. Well, affording it gets a little less affordable if now you have to pay $4 for gas. So we are going to proceed with that study and looking at that. And one of the industries that is highly impacted by that is the education system. And so I'd like to invite Clint up to talk about how housing and the educational system intersect.
Thank you, Jody. I saw Charlotte come up and I thought she was just going to cut me off. already. I've got 5 minutes and 2 slides. Right? No, I'm very thankful to be here today to talk a little bit about housing. And I'm just thankful that when I look around this room, the number of people that are here and involved in this conversation. I've had the opportunity to work in a variety of states and a variety of districts. These conversations don't happen anywhere else. And that's one of the things that's great about Muscatine and makes me very proud to be here in Muscatine. So housing development, housing, the stock, all of that impacts education just the way it does every other aspect of our community, but starting specifically with students and the impact on students. And we've heard pieces of this throughout the presentation today, but one of the things we know when we look at enrollment studies is the highest yields we get in terms of students come out of single-family homes. And obviously for Muscatine and a number of rural communities, we're seeing people are aging, they're not moving out of their homes, we're not seeing that turnover that's bringing those younger families in. So as we look at our yields from, even just from single-family homes over the last 10, 20 years, that number is getting smaller and smaller. Right? So right now we know for Muscatine, a single-family home brings in 0.25 students. Okay. And again, in other communities, when there's a lot of development, a lot of homes, we'll see that number close to 1 or even above 1. And so, again, we're getting fewer students out of that. The other thing, I think Ben talked about this a little bit as well, as people are aging in their homes, the homes are getting older, and whether they're moving into the kind of the next thing or passing away, by the time they do move out of that home, maybe it's not as in good condition. And then what's happening to it. And we've seen that in the community with just the percentage of homes that are renter occupied. And the owner of that home may not even live in the community. So we're not necessarily seeing the care of those homes that we would like to see. And again, a lot of conversation around some of those things. But what we know is, the higher percentage of those students that are living in rental situations like that, they come in with more risk factors, and one of those is mobility, where we're turning kids over a lot. So single-family homes has an impact just on providing stability, and that stability is so important. So as we look at students coming out of more stable housing environments, just the outcomes, there's decreased mobility, there's decreased negative behaviors exhibited at school, increased achievement, increased attendance, and increased graduation rates. Those are all things that we know are critically important for our kids and for our community. And so that housing has a big impact on them. Again, as I look at some of the work that's happening, and we look at the area around Jefferson Elementary, when you look at a heat map of the community, a majority of our students are in that area. And we also know we have a lot of poverty in that area as well. So all of this will have a positive impact on our students and on our community. And then the other piece that obviously is important to students is our staff. And we have a tremendous staff, but like other industries, we are challenged with retaining and attracting staff to this community. One of the things that a study that was done by the Community Foundation looking at our teachers, but specifically at teachers, the percentage of teachers that come from outside of Muscatine County, which is about 25%. Which actually, when I heard that number, I thought, wow, that's actually pretty good. I thought it might have been a little bit higher. But still, 25% are commuting in. As we look at that a little more closely, we know that teachers who are 5 years or less, right, that percentage is significantly higher, which makes sense. When you look at it as a brand new teacher coming into the community, is there available market rate apartments that I can afford to live in, right? Is there affordable housing that I can buy? And chances are the answer is no. And so a number of those individuals are living at home, wherever that may be, or wherever they can find those market rate apartments. So when you see the percentages for us, where they're choosing Scott County, Rock Island County, Johnson County, Iowa City, and the Quad Cities, like a number of other industries across our community. So what happens is I get established, I get a few years of experience with the school district. Now an opening is here in Bettendorf or in Iowa City. Hey, it's a lot less commute. I'm gonna move to that. So again, that's a challenge for us And again, I know there's a number of conversations happening about how we can create more of that opportunities for our staff, our young staff, to live here and work here, because it does impact. I had a superintendent presenting on kind of recruiting and retaining teachers, and he said there's 2 things you have to do in order to keep your staff, your teachers in the district. Get them married and get them mortgaged, right? And so again, the more we can find those opportunities, because we know when they're here, they buy into the community and they care about our kids, and they're going to stay. And again, what I will tell you, one of the reasons I am in Muscatine, this is a unique community. Everything you need to be successful is right here. When I think about the impact of our business community, our nonprofit community, our community college that's here, just the amounts of supports and industries around our kids and education, it's phenomenal. This doesn't happen anywhere else. So we have the ability to make a difference and continue to make a difference. Housing has a huge impact on that, so I'm just very thankful to be here and share some of that information with you. And I thank you all for being here for this conversation as well. Charlotte?
Thanks, Clint. When you have a supply side failure of housing, it does have a cascading impact on the economy and the education and health of our neighbors and children. We've established that today. And there's an old joke. When you ask an accountant what's 2 + 2, he'll shut the door, slide his chair over close to you, whisper in your ear, what number do you want it to be? And honestly, that's what housing is. It has an infinite number of income streams and downstream system expense containments just from housing development in our community, but often we don't look at it that way. We all know attainable housing is the most powerful community accelerant. Yet often it's not the first thing we collectively choose to invest in. So what is ROI? It's simply the math behind the investment, taking short and long-term earnings into consideration, as well as what cost savings might be able to be considered. For illustrative purposes, this is a t-shirt I have. My husband's an accountant, so in the case of kidnapping, he would likely calculate my future projected earnings and then net my wild, his word not mine, spending habits and maintenance costs, and then compare that against my life insurance valuation before determining as appropriate what I would call paltry investment and ransom. Now, I think when we relate that back to housing, it's exactly the same thing. Whoops, excuse me. I think the central ROI question is, as a community, would we be financially better off to invest housing now or forego the income stream created from housing, as well as cover the expected future costs of adverse outcomes from families living in affordable housing? I think there's a clear trade-off, and I would also tell you, I think there's an unmistakable risk of inaction. On the income side, the housing stocks are single largest collective asset. You heard Ben say that early. So let's just take a look at a few of the income streams created. Typically when someone owns a home, someone's going to pay to produce it. We've got about a 100-year life expectancy or better. Then the owner lives in it and pays us an annual fee to live there, which helps the city, the county, and the schools. And then annually, the household invests a significant portion of their income back into the community. Now, construction, for example, if we put 100 new rental homes on the market, during that construction phase, that's going to add $12 million to the bottom line, about 160 jobs in the first year. And I think that's going to fatten the community's billfold. For every 2 people added to a community, there's typically a secondary job necessary or created at that particular time. So when you build one house, you really need 2, and you end up with 2 family spending. And just to be clear, the cost for the developer, we've heard it over today, but typically just doesn't pencil out. And so we have to reduce barriers for creation, and we also have to help de-risk the investment. Sometimes we might do that through tip provision, infrastructure investment, preferential loan terms, land discounts, and some of those may even require jurisdictional bonding. But we have to find a way to support the income we're going to get on the other side. Businesses, we've talked plenty, they reside, grow, and choose in communities where they have a steady, strong workforce. We need to begin monetizing both system costs and lost income and GDP when that fails to occur during the housing shortages we have. And now we're going to talk a little bit about expenses really briefly. You've heard a little bit already touched on this today. The expenses are downstream costs to a community that underinvests in housing. What does that look like? Debbie talked about it. She talked about folks that pay too much for their rent, housing or their homes. Housing burden folks pay more than 30%. And that typically robs from food. It increases the risk of adverse outcomes ranging from costly health conditions to diminished education, as Clint touched on. To look at a few other downstream financial factors, think of the sheer cost of food banks. So we've created a whole industry around food, trying to serve because we have too high housing costs. If there was a greater housing stock, there would be less hungry folks. Rents out of reach make people more transitory. We heard that from Clint. Illustratively, what does that look like for our children? This is high school graduation rate. This was in Minnesota. It's 10-year-old data. I would guess after COVID, it's even worse when you look at it. The top line are children that are housed that are not on free and reduced lunches. The second line are children that are housed that are on free and reduced lunches. The bottom line are children that have housing insecurity. This is not an IQ issue. This is a housing issue. Academic underachievement has a direct long-term impact to children as well as the economy's GDP. We know the more educated our community is, the stronger the GDP is. It's just that simple. 80% of homelessness in Muscatine is affordable housing issues, just as it is in the state. And what does that look like? There's your faces of homelessness. Rents are out of reach. So will we be better off financially to invest in housing now? That original question. The answer is clear to both the community and our children. And we literally, I've just gone through its top level, we've just scratched the surface with the math, right? That we can continue to look deeper and deeper on both cost savings as well as income opportunities.